My presentation, as you'll see, has a lot of kind of similarities to Donnie's as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm pretty interactive, so if anytime you like have a question or comment, feel free to jump in and say something too. That way we can, I think, have more of an interactive experience, and that's something that I like. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're talking about specifically African Americans in religiously abusive organizations. These are some things that I think that's important to recognize. First and foremost, religion is an important aspect of the experience of African Americans in America. It served as a source of strength during hard times, provided hope that something better was coming. We think of the slaves that were brought to this country and stripped of their identity, and then Christianity was introduced to them, and they really grabbed onto it. It was that sense of hope, that resiliency that they used to get through those hard times when they were working and they were beaten, they were going through all these inhumane experiences. It was what they grabbed on to for strength. It provided a safe haven for the stresses of the world. And it also had a community focus. They were able to gather in churches. A lot of times Sunday was the day where they didn't have to work, so they were able to gather, maybe not always in an organized building, but gathering together and having that sense of community. And, despite the fact that, so many families were torn apart from each other, there was a familial atmosphere within that context where they were able to relate to each other and really have a sense of support while they were going through, the slavery experience. Right? The religious African American community was also visible and influential within the civil rights movement. A lot of the protests and the beginnings of it came from the religious community who said, this isn't right, we're all Christians here, why can't we treat each other equally? So it had basis in the religious movement. Giving back to the church in forms of donations and time, has been always strongly encouraged and sometimes required as well. There's this sense of, giving back. It's the altruistic, we give back because that's what we do, that's what's required of us. Religion is deemed by some as part of the backbones of the culture, kind of in general, just because it has its roots, so deeply ingrained from the time when African Americans first came to the shores of America. So, segueing on to African Americans in mental health. So, with African Americans, we have a higher rate of depression and anxiety than our white counterparts. We're also less likely to seek mental health counseling. Traditionally, we're also distrustful of mental health and health practitioners kind of in general. And there's a lot of factors that feed into it, but a lot of it comes from the slavery times, but also, in modern times where experiments were done without our consent. And a lot of unethical practices happen under the guise of providing, medical care or mental health care. So there's always been some distance between us and the mental health community, just a really big gap. African Americans are more likely to experience marital instability. This is also something that can be a prerequisite or a cause of, coming from slavery, because, families were torn apart, marriage between slaves was not always allowed, and, families were torn apart, children were taken away. And like I was saying before, African Americans are also likely to underutilize mental health resources. So a lot of times, when they do come to therapy, it's because it's the last resort, the very last. We did everything under the sun, and now we're coming to you because, we've done what we could do. At this point, it's often that last resort, especially with couples and with kids. Mike Biggle, the founder of IHOP, International House of Prayer. The characteristics of religiously abusive organizations. So here are some opposing critical thinking, isolating members and penalizing them for leaving, emphasizing special doctrines outside of Scripture, seeking inappropriate loyalty to leaders, dishonoring the family unit, crossing boundaries of behavior, and separation from a mainstream church or mainstream religion. And I want to kind of highlight the fact that, for a religiously abusive situation, everything doesn't have to be, check, but they have different aspects of one of, these things as well that make them religiously abusive. So it's not always so cut and dry. Sometimes I think a lot of times when we're talking about cults or religiously abusive situations, they're under the guise of something good. And so, that's how people, become involved in it. It's the guise of something good. We're doing good things for the community. We found new truth. We love seekers. We're friendly. We love each other. It's the guise of something good. I think that's important to know as well. Going to some additional characteristics, there is a focus, and this, like I said, isn't for everyone, but for some, there's a focus on a living religious figure as well, like a leader. There are certain expectations and standards that members are expected to respect and follow. A family atmosphere, we love families, we're family friendly, bring your kids is also emphasized and can be especially attractive to young adults who are really finding their way in life and may not have the grounding and the family, a good family unit growing up. So then they have this family atmosphere that they've always wanted, and that's part of the attraction to these types of groups. So next, I want to kind of read a quick letter to you from a church organization. And while this isn't, I guess, this big, huge, it's not at the far end of the spectrum. This is kind of in the middle. But I want to pull out some things that can go along with religiously abusive settings. So this is a letter that's actually been going on around on social media. I'll show you in just a moment. So with characteristics, children are sometimes separated from parents. They have special time, or we have a children's group specifically for children. That's often one of the characteristics of these groups. Women's reproductive choices are sometimes made for them. They're told when to have children, who they can have children with. So in many situations, rights are stripped away in that regard. Members are encouraged to recruit other members, and sometimes, almost all the time, groups are shrouded in secrecy to some regard. There's this emphasis on we have to evangelize, we have to show up, tell other people what we know, we have to bring more people in, and that's part of the expectations, of the group as well. So this was a letter I was kind of telling you about that's kind of been floating around on social media. I'll read it to you in case you're Matt, you can't see it, but it's from a church. Dear Sister Williams, this correspondence is being written to express our concern about your absence from attending church services over the past several months. Please know that when you're absent, you are truly missed. The church policy states a member who is absent from attending church services for 2 consecutive pastoral Sundays and fails to be present on the second Sunday of the following month without properly being excused by the pastor will be terminated from the church membership roll. We would welcome the opportunity for you to continue to be a part of the church family because we love each member and we are truly concerned about you. Therefore, we respectfully request your presence in church on Sunday, June 24th, to meet with the pastor and the board of trustees. Failure to do so will be an indication of your wishes to terminate your membership at Zion Chapel Church of God in Christ for excessive absenteeism. We look forward to seeing you at church on Sunday. And so, this is the nice, nasty kind of letters that are being sent out. As you can see from the date, it's actually fairly recent as well. So as you can see in this letter, that there's the expectation of attendance. On social media, people were saying that the attendance was probably also tied to her tithe and her donation to the church on a regular basis. And they were saying that, there's probably some background information on this as well. But this is an example of one of those coercive measures to say, you'll no longer be a part of our group if you don't come. Right. Absolutely. There's always I think the threat of, eternal consequences as far as your soul, and you're not going to make it, or you're going to have some kind of eternal consequence for not, being in our group or not attending, and that's sometimes tied to that as well. What attracts African Americans to religiously abusive organizations? 1, it provides a sense of belonging and structure. 2, the concept is that one must sacrifice in this life to be rewarded, and the next one is comforting. When we go back to the days of slavery, and slaves were, experiencing all these abuses and, being treated as less than human, they held on to the thought that, if we can make it through this, we'll get to heaven and everything will be okay. And that's something that, kind of is a common thread that goes throughout that as well. We suffer in this life for a better one than the next one. But, in reality, it keeps you confined as well. It's generational. One's parents, grandparents, and extended family may all be members. So it may not have even been a conscious choice, it just may be all that they know as well. You know, people don't typically always wake up one day and say, I'm gonna be a member of a cult. It just kind of happens, you know, as well. And, you know, when one's extended family members, one's parents, one's grandparents are all within that organization, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And especially for children growing up in that context, there's nothing else that they know. All right, I want to tell the story of actually a family that was an African American family involved with David Koresh. Sam McKenzie did a great article on the Henry family, which was something that I found out about as I was, you know, doing some research for this presentation. So the Henry family lived in the UK. They were an African American, or I guess African family that had five kids. The oldest one was the one that first got introduced to Koresh's teachings, and originally was the oldest child relocated from the UK to live in Waco on the compound that they had there. And she was able to influence the rest of her siblings, the other four, and her mother to move, you know, from the UK, basically forsake all, you know, because of his teachings and the fact that, you know, she was just so taken with him as a person and what they were teaching. So the mom and the four kids moved actually from the UK to Waco, and her father wasn't having any of it, and it actually led to her parents' divorce after they'd been married for decades because he refused to live with them in Waco. And you know, her mom was just so gung-ho, and this is what we need to do, and, you know, daughter was spearheading that as well. And so, unfortunately, they perished when the compound, you know, went down. And Sam, the dad, you know, was just devastated because he lost his entire family. And that sentiment is, you know, was indicative of many of the Waco families, you know, where there was one member out and the rest in. You know, they lost their entire family, and it was such a tragedy. Going back to, I want to share a little bit of my personal experience, kind of coming out of a cult and having that experience. When I was about 17 or so, my parents decided to do the whole forsake all and move to the country for a better life. They had met a couple that had a lifestyle center, and what they did at the lifestyle center was that basically they had people who were, you know, they were stressed out business people that were come to a retreat kind of in the woods in the country outside of, I want to say, regular life, so cell phone service didn't work. It was kind of a back to basis reset, but was marketed as a retreat for businessmen, but also for people who were going through withdrawals from substances as well. So it was really, you know, come back, we have this holistic approach. We'll do, you know, hot water baths, we'll teach you, you know, good cooking skills, you know, you'll have this holistic back to basics, away from, you know, the hustle and bustle of the world kind of experience. So at the compound we were at, my dad had actually worked for the government for about 18 years, quit everything, cashed in his 401k, and moved us all out to the country in Tennessee. So there, workers weren't paid, but were given a small stipend, you know, several $100s a month, which is pretty much nothing in today's world, you know, as well. Limited internet and phone service, so literally being cut off from the rest of the world, that was something that they really emphasized as far as returning back to family values. You know, you don't need the worldly influence. We're just going to be together and be happy and, you know, and not have all those distractions. So it's kind of a distraction-free retreat, if you will. Going on. So weekly church attendance and twice daily worships were required of all staff. So everybody gathered together twice a day, you know, for worships, and then everybody was required to attend church as well. Everybody was also required to tithe on the stipend they were given. And yeah, the leader's wife was the accountant at the church that everybody was supposed to go to, so they could obviously see who was returning the money and who was not. Kind of as in, which is indicative of pretty much all cults. There was one leader who basically his word was what everybody did. He made decisions for all the rest of the compound, and also was the only one that had access to the money and the resources as well. My family was the only African American family there, but we did have some single African Americans that were there, you know, unmarried, didn't have any children as well. And then there was another family as well that was Caucasian. So it was kind of a group of all of us, and then we had people kind of coming in and out for training and just to get experience. And so there was a lot of kind of in and outs, but we were there locally, and there were some other people there that lived there as well as part of that group. Other staff would be assigned to stay with my family, so we could have random people in our house at all times. You know, honestly, they actually had our house bugged, so they would make comments about personal conversations that we had inside the house, outside. They were very strict about how you could cook and what you could cook with. So it was a very strict vegan lifestyle, no meat was allowed. They also were pretty strict about cooking with oil as well. So any kind of fried food, any kind of sauteing, any kind of that was not, let's say not allowed. So it was a very strict way of living, and you know, obviously kind of back to the basics, no meat, no dairy, no eggs. You know, we're pretty basic there. So pretty much fruits, nuts, and grains and vegetables and stuff like that. So these are some of the rules and regulations. Women wear dresses and skirts, obviously modest apparel, no jewelry or makeup, no courting or dating, vegetarian and vegan at all times, and no television. And we also had to sign out whenever we left campus and say where we were going and why. So that was part of the expectations of anybody that was part of this group. And so as you can imagine, you know, being a teenager and having come from still a fairly sheltered environment, you know, being homeschooled, it was still a rude awakening to come back, to go to that type of structure for myself and my siblings as well. My siblings all had jobs, and you know, we did different things around the compound to facilitate guests, because guests were coming in, and you know, we were doing things as far as preparing meals, you know, facilitating workshops and things like that. And so, let's see. And so basically, the way that we actually got out was that my parents pretty much said they had had enough. My dad kept getting demoted as far as like power-wise, until they had basically promoted my brother above him. So he was, my brother was my dad's boss. And I think that was kind of the aha moment that was like, wait, this is not what we got into. My parents had originally come there to help actually build a school so that they could train, you know, other people on how to build lifestyle centers similar to the ones that we had. And once they got there, like all the plans were just basically like, well, we'll do that at some point. We'll do that 5 years down the road. That's not part of our 10-year plan. And the deadline that they had kept on getting pushed back, and that's what they had originally moved there, you know, to do. We want to start this school. We want to train these people. We want to, you know, help the world and save the world, and you know, all those altruistic thoughts of, we're just gonna do it, guys. And so when that happened, it was just kind of this whole sense of, you know, disillusionment. And I remember my parents sitting us down in the living room saying, you know, we're kind of tired of our house being tapped. And I think we actually whispered this conversation because we knew the house was bugged as well. So they were like, you know, we're gonna go. And it wasn't a huge surprise to us, because honestly, you know, 4 kids living in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee, we're pretty sick of it as well. To be honest with you, you know, especially as a teenager and not having internet, I think that was probably one of the, having had it before and having experienced it, you know, to be cut off from those things was, I wouldn't necessarily say a hardship, but it wasn't comfortable. I think 2007, 2008. So, and I understand people were in organizations for much longer than that. However, you know, my parents, I want to say, had a coming to themselves moment at that point. And thankfully, you know, they hadn't let our house go, as far as they hadn't been able to sell our house. So thankfully, we were able to move back into our house in Georgia, and we had a place to go, which isn't something that a lot of cult members have, because they've given all their resources when they happen. And we were one of the really fortunate ones that actually had a house. You know, they kept the mortgage up to date, so we just literally just was able to move right back into the house that we had. And that was really fortunate. So, I think everybody deals with their experience in different ways. For my family, I think it's something that definitely changed the trajectory of kind of how we related to each other as people, as well. I think after that, my parents really set us down and basically apologized and said, we're so sorry, we did this, you know, we recognize that, you know, that this wasn't the right course of action, and we were wrong. The way that the process of leaving happened was that we really didn't give them like notice of we're leaving. We just just kind of left. It was the daytime though. What we did do, I think we did a total of 2 loads back, and that was it. So that meant that we left a lot of our things, at the house, just because we didn't have the resources to obviously bring, all of our furniture and belongings and things. So a lot of things were left behind. But it was also, things can be replaced, people can't. And so it was also that sense of loss, because we left so many. There was family heirlooms that we had packed up that we had to leave there, an antique truck, and also thousands of dollars in resources. But that my parents had donated, with the understanding that they would be used for a building project that never happened. So yeah. Some of the things that keeps African Americans in these organizations worry about how they would be perceived by their friends that they've made. We had a lot of close friends, that came through that organization and, had some genuine friendships as well. Overwhelmed by the idea of living lives outside of the family that they've come to know and love, and also anxiety about going back into the world and what they would do. In the case of my family, I think we were kind of I wouldn't say a special case, but because we hadn't lived there for years and years, it was easier to cut that relationship off in a way. We didn't have the years invested. Yes, there was time and money and resources, but we didn't have the systematic years that a lot of people that are in these organizations have. And also with us, we were the only family. We didn't have an extended family there, it was just our family. So the rest of our family was already outside and was always outside. Also anxiety about going back to the world and what they would do. That was a concern for my family also because my dad was unable to get his job back with the government. So then that led to, some economic, struggles as well, because here was somebody that had all these years of experience but also had a huge gap in his resume. Couldn't really account for it because you're not gonna say, this is what I've been doing for this year in my resume. So that was also, part of some economic hardship as well, and some financial struggles that went along with that too. Just the whole idea of kind of picking back up your life where you left it. That's a really hard process, especially when you're kind of starting from the ground up and when you don't have retirement or any, backup resources as well, because everything is literally, been given to the cause. How can we help African American families recognize that they may be reluctant in seeking help? Encourage them to share their truth, but in their own time. But also recognize that leaving these organizations can also mean estrangement from support systems of family and or friends. And also normalizing that feeling of loss. A lot of times people who leave these organizations really do go through a true grieving process because they've lost such an important part of, who they were or who they thought they were, or, whoever they found themselves to be within that context as well. So they're grieving their sense of self, but they're also grieving the loss of, the support system, the community, the people they've come to know and love as well. Therapeutic interventions, this is more for people in kind of the profession working with individuals coming out of these organizations. Trauma-focused CBT has been found really helpful as far as an empirical intervention for helping people who have had PTSD and are coming from these organizations and having experienced various traumas. Also narrative therapy, where they're encouraged to share their story in their own words, but aren't pushed and prodded. It's just kind of talk to me about your story, tell me more, without feeling judged or, just shocked. I think a lot of times with therapists, they're working with people that are coming from these organizations and they just have this look of shock on their faces, and the client sees that and says, kind of closes off from that point on, because they see that look of, what in the world did you just tell me, and I can't believe that this happened. Therapists can't keep a straight face. So this is one of the, I think, situations where a poker face is, a really good thing to have as well. Also, family therapy is I think, imperative. Unfortunately, my family is one that will never go to therapy at any point in time. They will never go to therapy. So this would be something that would have been great for my family, to be able to really have a time set apart where we kind of just talk about what happened, in a therapy office. And unfortunately, it really will never happen, but because they don't believe in therapy, ironically. But this would have been a really helpful resource as well, just to be able to have all of us together, all 4 kids and parents in the same room talking about, what happened. I think that, you know, kind of looking back and, you know, in my interactions with the African American community, you know, I found that I don't necessarily try to disrupt, you know, their source of strength. It's more like asking questions and, hey, tell me more about that, and asking appropriate questions in the right context. You know, it's not an exact science, but I think it also depends on the person and their openness to discuss things. Hey, let's look at this from another point of view and asking those kind of questions. So, implications for practice: recognize each family is different, encourage their emotional processing of experience at their own pace and their own time. Don't rush it. But also talk about ways that family can build a sense of community out of religion. Kind of like I was saying before, like with my family, there's no organization whatsoever. We do not have any community. However, you know, community is an important thing. And, you know, it's important to have that conversations about, hey, you know, who are some of the supports? Who's your family? Who are some people that you can connect with that were outside of that you just came from, that are, you know, just really cool people to hang out with and, you know, get to know better as friends. And that's, you know, I think that's the beginning of a great conversation about, you know, finding something, creating that for yourself outside of the organization.